Let's give it up for Peter M.
Okay, that works. Thank you. My name is Pete. I'm a recovered alcoholic. Grateful to be alive and sober, part of a sacred place called Alcoholics Anonymous. And first things first, thank Paul and the group for inviting me here and putting me up and taking good care of me since I arrived. And thank Ron for coming down and my buddy along with him from Pennsylvania. So Doylestown, excuse me. It's a good part of town. Grateful to be here. God separated me from alcohol June 23rd, 1988. And I'm here tonight, hopefully as a recovered alcoholic, hopefully get to share that message of what it's like being a recovered alcoholic, all the while knowing I can be unrecovered if I don't continue to chop wood and carry water and work diligently with the spiritual principles laid out in the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous. 30 years ago, I was living in a hallway in an abandoned building in Lower Manhattan, an area called Alphabet City. And I'm here tonight to share a message of recovery that was given to me. And I will tell you, over the years, things have changed for me as far as how to approach this work, how to sponsor people, my relationship with God, and the gift that I have been given so freely. In my first few years of recovery, I would get up and get a 1-year, 2-year, 3-year, 4-year chip and tell everyone how hard I worked this year, how I buckled down, how I was going to any lengths. And there's something that says, not by works, lest any man shall boast. And how could I take credit for anything when the gift has been given to me? And I will tell you, on June 23rd, 1988, I was surrendered. For years, I thought I surrendered. I made this plea to God. And in that plea, I got taken out. And that infers a lot of self-reliance. And what happened to me on June 23rd, 1988, when I came to in the back of an abandoned building hallway, I was met with my first encounter with God. Now, I don't know if you're like me, but usually, I think even currently, when I make a plea to God, I ask him a question, that the answer is going to come in a neatly wrapped gift box with a red ribbon on it that says, "To Peter from God, here's your answer." And very often the answer comes messy. It comes very much unlike I was planning or anticipating. And so what happened to me on June 23rd, 1988, I was met with this GOD, the gift of desperation. And our big book says circumstances made us willing. I was met with the end of the road. I was met with circumstances beyond which I could ever fathom. I ran out of options that particular day. And the interesting thing about losing control, that's taken from me. It's relinquished without me volunteering to do it by being completely shattered. Losing control is not something I turn over to God, even currently. My bottom is not something I turn over to God. That is given to me. And so what happened to me in June of 1988, June 23rd to be exact, I was met with the hideous four horsemen. I was met with, I'm out of options. I was met with, I'm out of road. And I was met with the gift of desperation. And in that place, I got taken out of the scrap heap, as our book says, to a level of life better than the best I'd known. I had no idea where I was going to be put, the path I was going to be put on. There's something, I think it's St. John of the Cross, don't hold me to this, but there's something within every one of us, the God DNA, where we're searching, looking to get right with something, the fire in the soul that burns. And AA put me on a path I never walked before and gave me 12 steps I knew nothing about and told me to have a relationship with God I knew nothing about as well. And the only thing that allowed me to put one foot in front of the other, to chop wood and carry water, if you will, was that fire in the soul to get right with something. And for the longest time, I looked for it in the bottom of a whiskey bottle. And it worked for a little while, but to run out, I wanted to search again. So here I am in the back of this hallway in June of 1988, and I met with the end. I met with my first encounter with God. Again, it didn't feel like God. And in that place, I begged God to take me from this, that I didn't want to die. And I was rocketed, really, into this new dimension of living. And trust me, at the beginning, it was messy. I had been homeless for close to 6 months, living in an abandoned building and hustling money through the streets. And I had been in the same clothes for over 6 months. And I hadn't eaten a good meal, and I hadn't had a good glass of water. I was drinking and eating pills. That's what I was up to. I had some experience with non-conference approved dry goods during that time. My body had holes all over it to show that, and I had 6 treatment centers behind me and a bunch of detoxes, and here I am in the back of this hallway. And please take me from this, I don't want to die. And I got some words. And only if you've had some sort of God experience will you get this. And if you haven't, it sounds like I'm making it up. Because the mind can't wrap itself around a God experience. What we can do is share our stories and illustrate the God experience. We get the God winks along the way. The Big Book says the best years of our life are ahead of us, which means if we've had a bunch of God experiences now, there's more to encounter. But in order for me to do that, there must be some sort of willingness within me. Sometimes the heart has to be open. Sometimes the heart is open for us. When that happens, it doesn't feel good. On June 23rd, 1980, I was split wide open. That does not feel good when I'm met with complete defeat. But in the breaking open of us, where the mind shuts down, is where God's light shines through. And we're made different. What I got was a whisper in this ear. And it went, enough, I have other work for you to do. And I really thought I had lost my mind because I heard people sharing, you're going to drink enough to start hearing things and seeing things. And I've been in enough treatment centers. I visited AA, usually drunk, and I would hear these stories. And when I was met with this voice, enough, I have other work for you to do, I truly thought I had lost my mind. I bought the farm. There's a point of no return. Wet brains on the next turn. The good news was this. I actually lost my mind for that brief moment. Because if I'm in my mind, if we are in our mind, you can't hear God. When I'm in my mind and I think I hear God, what I'm hearing is me playing God. What I'm listening to is my pride and ego. What I'm listening to is me. And in order to get well, I need to experience the death of self and successful living, which steps 4 through 9 will do. It will break down the self in order to live in the spirit. And so I didn't know this. I just, oh my God, I was petrified that I heard this voice, as if Paul went over and leaned in this ear and whispered, enough, I have other work for you to do. It took years in AA for me to get that, to understand what my purpose is, to have, as the book says, a purpose-driven life. I'm clear who I work for. And through that moment of sanity, that lucid interval, wholeness of mind, I began to follow some directions. And I landed in my 7 treatment center. And being in there for about 10 days, I wanted to drink again. Because alcoholism doesn't care what kind of encounters I have with God, doesn't care how long we're sober, doesn't care how spiritual we might be today, it'll wait till tomorrow. But through the grace of God, I landed in my 7 treatment center, and I didn't drink after 10 days. I didn't AMA. They shipped me off to Minnesota, and I did more treatment, and then I did something called a halfway house, 3/4 house, and sober house, and after about a year, I was brought home. All by the grace of God. Now, we talk about the grace of God a lot in Alcoholics Anonymous. But for the grace of God, but for the grace of God. We hear that a lot. I heard that right from the get-go in AA, but for the grace of God. The grace of God, an unwarranted gift, like a mama feeding her baby, not expecting a parade for it. It's her baby, and she feeds it. It's what she does. Same thing with this unwarranted gift from God, the grace. But there's a big difference between getting the grace of God and experiencing that power which gives us grace. The only reason why I'm alive, because during my drinking, during my arrest, during my getting beat up, and a lot of the illegal activities I was involved in, it was but for the grace of God that I didn't wind up in jail for a long time or dead. My job now is to experience that power which gives me grace. In fact, I will tell you, where I stand now, it has been this way for a while, my job is not even to take care of myself. Hear what I'm telling you. My job is not, our job is not to take care of ourselves. Now, when I got in here, I said, I got to take good care of myself. I got to take care of myself. And based on my track record, I do not know how to take care of myself. What I do is I get drunk. Then I get really drunk. Then I cry. And then I borrow money from you and pass out. That's what I do. My job is not to take care of myself. God's job is to take care of me. My job is to seek God's will and carry out the vision of His will in all my activities. That's my job. And something happens when I'm practicing fidelity to God and I'm doing that stuff. Somehow my life gets better. What's going on in here gets better. We get to walk in the sunlight of the Spirit. We don't need to feel I have to apologize for God. We need to apologize for God because this whole thing called Alcoholics Anonymous is about God, about shouting God from the rooftops and taking a drunk to have their own personal experience with God, and nothing less than that great fact. Page 25 talks about that. And so I was brought home from Minnesota after a year, and I met my first sponsor, and I couldn't pick him on my best day. He was put right in front of me, and I heard a message he was sharing, and it was one from this big book. He talked an awful lot about the God of his understanding and where he was currently. If recovery isn't the most important thing in my life, I can't have it. And if recovery is the most important thing in my life, I can't keep it. It's just the way it is. Early recovery, I found myself getting attached to my story. You know, we tell stories in AA. That's what we do. You get a chance to give a talk and you tell what it was like, what happened, what it's like now. And very often what we do is we forget the what it's like now. Or if we talk about the what it's like now, what I used to do is tell you everything's great and the meeting's over, but we don't really talk about what it's like now. Currently what I'm doing, what spiritual principles am I working with, and what kind of hiccups am I experiencing? We don't do that. But we get attached to our story, as I did. This is my story. Grew up in Brooklyn. Mom committed suicide. Mom was an alcoholic. And the relationship with my dad was terrible. And I walk with this 2,000-pound weight on my back of my story. And the story begins to become who I be. And it isn't. Our stories are not who we are. It's part of our life. It's part of our story. It's part of our past. But very often we will walk around in the present still living in the past. How could I be present when I'm crushed by the weight of the past? How can I live now knowing how I lived then? And yet we'll walk around, this is my story and it owns me. I'm not even telling you a story. I have to tell you the story because it owns me. And it's another form of bondage where the steps ought to get me free. I share my story to give you testimony to qualify. So you know I'm an alcoholic. And somewhere in there, if there's a drunk sitting in a room or many drunks, they know we're alike. And we've discussed the problem and the common bond we have as an alcoholic. Oh yeah, I drank like that. I did those things. And we identify in the brokenness, but then what? I was taken to a meeting in Minneapolis on Friday nights called the Three Legacies meeting. And I saw men sharing from the podium from this book, talking about a God freely, weeping from the podium. And I watched the way they were dressed. They were dressed impeccable. They looked good. I liked the way they were dressed. They gave AA its respect. And it was proper, and I wanted to be like that. The other thing I was attracted to, and it's really silly, I grew up in Brooklyn, and the people that my dad ran around with, and some of the older guys on the corner, they never wore wedding rings. Because where I grew up, if you were a man and had a wedding ring, it meant you were a wimp. You were owned. So real men don't wear wedding rings, and that's how I grew up. And I go to this meeting in Minnesota, and I'm watching these spiritual giants speaking, and some of them who were married had wedding rings on, and I said, that's different. I notice things like this. And they talk lovingly about their wives. Where I grew up, you don't do that stuff. It's a sign of weakness. So I was getting, not only visually and audio-wise, I was listening and watching a different walk. God, I wanted what you guys had to offer. When I got back from Minnesota, I found my first appointed teacher was put in my path, and we began a journey through the big book. Now, this is where it gets tricky. It's supposed to be really good, but it can get tricky. What I got into was almost being evangelical with the work. I was so excited about it with this big book. And what I began to do is tell people who weren't in the book that they weren't doing AA, that they were wrong. That's not really 100% true statement. Because people will find their way in Alcoholics Anonymous and have no right to alienate someone from an AA meeting. And what I've watched over the years is we have big bookers against non-big bookers against big bookers. And who has the best sponsor, who has the most popular sponsor, etc. That's not what this book is about. In fact, if we really claim to be spiritual, we should have a different heart in this walk. In fact, usually the men or women who are really on a spiritual path are not even talking that they're spiritual. In fact, if you're saying you're spiritual, you're probably not. There's a quote by a Jewish philosopher, and he said something like, woe to the man so possessed that he thinks he possesses God. As soon as I think I got the spiritual angle, I got this God, I just lost it. It's like the person who says, I'm a really humble guy. You know he's not, just by that statement. And so I began a journey through the book, and I fell in love with the mechanics. And I got into gobbling up a lot of information, which is good. What I seek now is more transformation than information. Here's what I've learned. Everything I need to do this life, everything I need to do this walk, God gave me the day I was born. July 14th, 1959, God gave me a full tool belt. And it was pure, like all of us. But somewhere along the way, I encountered ego, I encountered pride, and I encountered the thought life. And along with that, I started to buy into ideas, attitudes, and emotions, belief systems that didn't work. They seemed to work at the beginning. I'm 7 years old, and in the summertime, back in the day in Brooklyn, it was kind of like living in the country where I lived. And my closest friend in the whole world was this guy, Joe Pesci, just like the actor. And Joey would roll into my driveway around 7 o'clock in the morning, right out of bed, with his pajamas on. We were like in the first or second grade, and we had the old bicycles with the big banana seats, and if you remember, if the old guys remember this, and we used to put baseball cards with clothespins on the wheels to make it sound like an engine. And so here we are, and he would call my name, and I'd go down, hop on my bike with my pajamas, and we'd ride through the streets. Back in the day, you can do things like that. And my mom got wise to this, and she would leave a quarter on the kitchen counter, and I put it in my pajamas, and we go for a ride and go into the old luncheonettes we used to have, and we get an egg cream, maybe a couple of pretzels, the two of us, and go back to the house, and Mom would make breakfast. And we did this every summer, day after day after day. And one morning, we were in the luncheonette, and there was an older fella in there, and he got a kick. He was amused by the two of us in our pajamas running through the streets on our bicycles early in the morning. And he said something along the lines of, look at these two guys, these two kids in their pajamas riding a bike. That's a harmless thing. It's an older guy having these two kids being amused by it. What I heard was, look at these two idiots in pajamas. They should have a job and be running a corporation by now. I encountered thought. I encountered my ego for the first time. So much so that I never rode on a bike early in the morning in my pajamas with Joey again. Because every time he would roll into my driveway, I'd lie. Let's go swimming in the pool. Mom's making breakfast, but I will not get on the bike and roll around in my pajamas anymore. It was the first time I was worried about what other people think of me. Ego. Can't look bad. I look foolish, and I'm all but 7. And that's when everything changed. That's when out there became my master. How I look, how I sound, how I be became my external conditions began to own me at 7. And lots of times, if we think about our life story, at some point, we're running around in pajamas and don't care what the hair looks like or anything. And then there's a point where we become consumed by it. How much money do I have makes me a man. What I do for a living makes me a man. What I drive makes me a man. Where I live makes me a man. All wrong. And I'm trying to navigate through this and trying to control all of that. In fact, my prayer, and to see if you identify with this, how often is our prayer really secretly looking to get control? My prayer is to control, to get God to see my angle, to get God to do what I want. I pray to seek control because as an alkie, I am controlling. And I seek more control to prove that God loves me and that He even exists. I pray something happens, see God loves me more than you. I know you have a God, but I'm special. And when He doesn't do what I want, there is no God, and I become vengeful towards this very same God I'm praying. External conditions became bondage to me, to the point where wanting money, wanting possessions, wanting things, wanting the girlfriend, I began to rebel against that because I knew I couldn't have it. So then I began to despise people who have it, because inwardly I know it's not going to happen for me. So I'm caught in this thing. I'm damned if I do and damned if I don't. And guess what works on that? Guess what I can pour all over that, where I don't even care anymore, and that's booze. The belief system I was under when I was trying to get sober in treatment was if I can just stop drinking, like sometimes we hear in AA, put the plug in a jug, which is a fallacy. It's impossible. If you're an alcoholic, the plug is never going in the jug. It's staying out, and I'm going to drink until I get the next one. If I had the power to put the plug in a jug, why am I sitting in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous? I'd be home watching TV now. I'd be on vacation doing something else. I'd be doing something else, not sitting in an AA meeting. But I just don't have that kind of power. Constantly seeking control. I can do that while I'm sober. I have done it while I'm sober. Trying to get up enough money and going to any lengths to get money so I can sleep at night, rather than seeking God first. Trying to get that job to make me who I am so I can sleep at night. External conditions are never a remedy for what ails me in here. And we segue right into, if you will, the 12 steps. Now, I don't want to give anyone the impression that I'm knocking this big book, because it is like my Bible, next to the good book. This is my GPS for life. This thing has saved my life. Not so much the book, but what the book has done for me, taken me to a God of my understanding. It's kind of like going to a restaurant and studying the menu. You know all the colors on the menu. You know all the specials on the menu. You know where the menu was printed. You know everything on the menu, and you get up and walk out of the restaurant. You're going home hungry. And I've watched a lot of cats study this book, become big book lawyers, but don't really apply in their life this information. And what we have is people walking around with a head full of knowledge and a belly full of misery. 1988, I get a sponsor. And when I came home from Minnesota, it was actually 89. And we began a journey through the book. And I was impressed by people who had this information. I had no idea what was about to happen to me. There's something that goes, help me, I've fallen into the hands of a loving God. You know, why would I say, help me, I have fallen into the hands of a loving God? Usually falling into the hands of a loving God sounds like a good deal. But coming into Alcoholics Anonymous with all my belief systems, all my ideas, all the things I worship, being totally attached to external conditions to fix what was in me, and God says we're going to prune the tree down to nothing. We're going to strip you down to the raw by God's handiwork, and I would interpret this painful stuff, because it felt painful, as something bad rather than good, as if God just sent me the trials of Job. And why is He doing this to me? Why is He challenging every single belief system I have? Why is He turning my life upside down to where I feel naked against the world? It's actually a good thing. I wasn't planning on that type of encounter. I just wanted to get some information, write my steps, and go home and be a guru, be Moses. But that's not what happened. Because after a short time, I'm doing the steps, and I'm getting better. I'm feeling really okay. But then I hit the spot where I wasn't okay again. I got the opportunity to speak to a gentleman named Paul Martin a handful of years ago. And Paul Martin was close. There was a gentleman who sponsored him, and then Dr. Bob. Paul Martin was in my lineage. And my old home group in New Jersey was giving me a difficult time about when I would share about going through the steps at least once a year. And some of the members there were giving me a hard time, telling me it was not Alcoholics Anonymous. So I called up this gentleman, Gary Brown, who was sponsoring me for a while. And he said, I'd like you to call Paul Martin, because Paul Martin kind of started with that. I remember calling him. I thought I was calling like Elvis Presley. I couldn't believe I'm calling Paul Martin, you know. And I get him on the phone and we're talking about this. And what he shared with me was pretty important and very interesting. He says the stories in the book, in the early edition, they tell their story, and a lot of those early members were good for about 5 years. They're feeling pretty good, had kind of traction in life. But what some of them don't tell you, after about 5 years, they little by slowly got encountered with fear again, being restless and discontented. And they were relying on an old experience to be current. They were relying on a spiritual awakening they had 5 years ago or 3 years ago to work now. And it wasn't. And they were experiencing bouts of depression. When you read the book Soul of Sponsorship, there's a story about Bill meeting Father Dowling, where Bill had 5 years and he was in the depths of despair. In fact, people thought he was drinking. They don't tell you that part. And what Paul Martin told me was he was sponsoring a gentleman who was about to come over to his house to do a fifth step. And Paul prayed and he had this idea that maybe I can write a little bit of inventory and share it with the new guy. And that's exactly what he did. And when he got done with that, he felt freer. He just hit gold. And then did the 6, 7, 8, 9, found some new amends, and his 10 and 11 life exploded. And he realized he touched something that was unique. And he began to do that. And that's where that came from. I'm one of those folks who go through the steps once a year. Not to gain more knowledge, not to gain more information, but I love the effect produced by God, and I don't need anything kind of gathering up in there. It's kind of like if you paint the wall and it looks like it's flawless, and you go back 2 days later and you find spots and you got to touch up the spots. I can't afford that when it comes to my life and spiritual living. So what the work allows me to do is continually flush out and kill off the ego. And so I begin going through the work with my first sponsor. I learned about step 1, much more than I did in 7 treatment centers, by the way. My sponsor wasn't giving me charts and graphs and telling me what alcohol does inside my body. He was just looking at my experiences, what alcohol does to me, and how I'm taken back to it. And I sort of pointed in a solution or 2 and a decision to get there in 3, and I did 4 through 9, and I experienced something. And I'm reading lots of inspirational books along the way, and then I hit the wall. Information, knowledge is not going to keep a drunk like me sober. I mean, we need some information. We're going to gain knowledge just by coming to AA and reading other books besides the book. But what am I doing with that? See, I can be one of those folks where looking at someone having a spiritual transformation, I can look at the beauty of someone who's spiritually awake, the beauty of the spiritual transformation, which can coexist with my reluctance to do what they did to get what they got. And if I always did what I've always done, I'm always going to get what I always got. The soul always knows what to do, where to go, and what to say. And my job is to seek that which the soul loves, and that's God. When I start to look at the steps as a way to improve my relationship with God, I begin to approach the steps differently. How many times have we gone to a meeting and heard a speaker share, bless their hearts, whether it's a step meeting, a workshop weekend, or just a straight talk? What it was like, what happened, and what it's like now, and you really don't know what's going on in their life. How many times have we heard someone give a talk on the steps and don't hear about the struggles they've had in the steps, like writing step 4. Get a new guy with a weak back. You know there's going to be trauma writing that 4th step. You know there's going to be scratching and clawing and backsliding writing that 4th step. You know they're going to be uncertain and doubtful and afraid to put down sex inventory. What does it look like? What does it feel like? How often do we hear that kind of language at an AA meeting? How often do we hear speakers giving a comedy routine for now and everyone loves them, but did I learn anything? Did I really identify with the speaker? Have I identified with current brokenness? And the thing about Alcoholics Anonymous, if we're really sticking to the page, it's about sharing what it's like now. Yeah, I'm living in the sunlight of the Spirit, I have a great relationship with God, and I'm struggling financially. I'm struggling with anger. I'm struggling with some defects of character. There's some There's some things I'm trying to overcome and I'm struggling with. Do we talk about that? Why not? Am I in a place of resistance or acceptance? Dis-ease and discomfort, or peace-ease and comfort? Right? Am I in this thing for compliance, or am I in a place of surrender? Is my recovery based in abstinence, or is my recovery based in spirit? These are things I have to look at myself in the mirror and find out where I currently am. Well, the first time I did my fourth step, here's how it went. I got a notepad and pen, and I had directions, and I wrote out 4 columns. I wrote a master list, and off I went. And then I stopped there for about 10 minutes because I realized I had other things to do. And the next day I go to write a fourth step, and I look around the apartment and says, well, maybe I should clean up a little bit. I was living in an abandoned building. I'm an AA, so I should look proper all the time. So I'll clean the rug and dust a little bit. Well, it's going to be a long night. I'm writing a 4 steps. Maybe I should have a little meal. I should eat something. Then I'll make a pot of coffee. That's what you guys do in AA. And I finish off a pot of coffee. And at 9 o'clock at night, I look like a crackhead because my eyes are coming out of my house. And then I watch some TV and never write a 4th step. I couldn't be searching, fearless, and moral. And so I just closed the book and never got back to it. And then one day my sponsor says, how's the 4th step going? And I made up a lot of lies, and he realized I wasn't writing it, and I'll clean up the language, but he reminded me of who's in charge of my life. That in order for me to be searching, fearless, and moral, I had to go to God, because he's the one who has that, and I don't. There's something that goes of myself, I am nothing, the Father doeth the works. I need to get that at a gut level, not a head level. I can't do this walk with the head. I got to do this walk with the heart. Of myself, I am nothing, the Father doeth the works. And so what I had to do was begin to pray. I had to go to God to be searching, fearless, and moral. So much so, I had to write that prayer across the top of my page. Thank you, God, for allowing me to be searching, fearless, and moral. And I would go into prayer and meditation. Then I'd pick up the pen, and you know what? The 4th step got done, and I didn't write it. I mean, I was there, the pen was in my hand, but the pen becomes a spiritual translator. And I go sit in 5, and the things I was never going to give up was coming out of my mouth. It was a God experience. But to use me to do that work, it would never gotten done. Because back in step 3, we're saying, God, I offer myself to thee, which means I'm taking, here's me, and you do with me as you see fit. Take me like the wretch I am and do anything you want with me. Now, we can say those words like I did, but not understand what we're telling God here. You're taking me like this malleable piece of clay and do whatever you want with it. What is my current bondage? What are my current difficulties? We always like to write those out to get a visual on what I'm surrendering to God. All of me. Am I willing to play by someone else's rules in step 3, not mine anymore? Am I willing to be made fundamentally different from the inside out into a person I don't even know what that person looks like yet? You know, the person walking into step 4 is about to have this spectacular upheaval, but we don't know what that's going to look like. And if you're like me, my ego wants to peek around the corner to see what the finished product's going to look like and tweak it a little bit. That's none of my business, though. God, I offer myself to thee to build with me and to do with me as you will. We're asking God to relieve us of the bondage of self and to take away our difficulties. Why? So we can bear witness to the person walking in the door. We're not doing that 3rd step so we can say we did the 3rd step, so I can stand at the door like I'm Moses, so I can tell you how spiritual I am. It's one reason, to begin house cleaning, so I can stand at the door as a spiritually awake person and bear witness, meaning living proof that this God works in my life. In your life, because that's what men did for me. That's what women did for me in Alcoholics Anonymous. So we have some topics here that I'm supposed to cover. Okay. It says studying the big book but not taking action. Now, please, these topics can get a little edgy, and I hope God gives me proper words. The last thing I want to do, if you're sitting here and never opened up the big book, whether you're sober 10 days or 30 years, is not to split the room. This is not about right and wrong, better than and less than. Please don't hear that. If you're not writing inventory, okay. Maybe tonight you will. If you haven't had a sponsor, okay. But it's about waking up and taking, putting on a new pair of glasses and seeing perhaps I can do things differently. Maybe I bottomed out with double-digit sobriety. I'm sober, I'm going to meetings, I sponsor people, but there's just something that's not right, and I don't know what it is. And my ego, I wake up to, has been running my life. I'm seeing the world through the eyes or the ego. I'm hearing the world through my ears or the ego rather than God. And I know it deep down inside that something's not right. Or I'm relapsing. I'm a revolving door. And every time I say I'm done, I get drunk. I'm done this time, I get drunk. Maybe we need to take a look at some things. But as I share my experience, trust me, I'm not trying to split a room or break someone down. If the information disturbs us, great. Big Book says perhaps we've disturbed them on the question of alcohol. That's a good thing. So it's just studying the Big Book and not taking action. I do a lot of workshops over the year. I've attended a bunch. And I notice, no matter where I'm speaking, it seems like a lot of folks show up, whether I'm speaking or other people are speaking, at these weekend Big Book workshops, these weekend spiritual retreats. Now, it's wonderful you're there. But when you have 30 years and you're knocking like 3 or 4 and 5 of those out a year, or 10 years sober, and you're going to one because you really need to be there, I got to ask you why. Why am I still looking to have the screw turn just a little bit? Is it possible I'm still restless, irritable, and discontented after 10 or 15 years sober? And if that's the case, it doesn't make you a bad AA member. It just means maybe instead of going to a workshop, I need to stay home, get a sponsor, and do the work. And let the work take me, the 12 steps take me where God needs to take me. But what happens is the ego starts to reemerge. Thibaut talked about this. And I want to taste it, but I don't want all of it. I want to get a little bit more information to kind of patch up the wound, but I don't want to have it rooted out. It's just too uncomfortable. I might be vulnerable. I might lose control of my life, and the ego wants no part of that. I just want enough information to get by so everyone thinks I'm okay. I used to go to, when I was new, Joe and Charlie, when they were alive, would come to New York every so often. I went to like 5 in a row. My first year, second year, third year, and so on. And after a while, I stopped going. I would go to other workshops. Then I got asked to do them. And over the years, I remember people I saw at my very first workshop. I'm sober 18, 20 years, 25 years, and they're still doing like 3 and 4 of these things a year. And when I would speak to these poor souls, they're all tore up on the inside. They're going on every sort of spree. They're restless, irritable, and discontented. And I would say, like, do you have a sponsor? Well, that meant no. What does your 11th step look like? What do you mean? That's a bad answer. Do you have a prayer life? Well, I pray on the way to work. You mean driving? That's talking to God. Am I praying? Am I bringing my struggles to God? See, if life is my master, how could I serve God? If things are my master, how could I be a servant of God when I'm a slave to everything else? I've made money, I got the job, got the family, the house, white picket fence, and I've sold my soul to gain the world. No wonder why I'm in trouble. And what's really frightening is I think I've transcended my alcoholism life. Because I'm sober 10, 15 years, I will never get drunk again because I feel good. Forgetting that alcoholism, cutting, baffling, and powerful, and patient, and sneaky, and I will get hijacked. I'll never transcend alcoholism. That means I'm cured. It'll get me where I think I'm good. And I know it'll get me when I'm not good. And all I have is a daily stay of execution that hinges on my relationship with God, yes? I asked them, where are your meditation? They don't meditate. Not doing nightly inventory. Praying while they're driving. So there's no real prayer life. There's no 10-step. There's no GPS for the day. Have a ton of outstanding amends they haven't made yet. How could I say I've had a spiritual awakening as the result of the 12 steps when I have a whole bunch of amends that I could be making without causing more harm? I'm not really in the sunlight of the Spirit, which is the goal, which means that 8-step list doesn't stay the same, it gets bigger. And defects of character in 6 and 7, God forbid I should give those up to God. God forbid God should take them because I'll be the hole in the donut. There'll be nothing less of me. Failing to realize I'll be more of me, I'll be a really authentic person, an approachable person, and able to do God's work that much better. So 6 and 7 stuff is floating around. It's shown up in defects. What they have is friends. They bring their friends, the other defects in. They have troops. They come in. So now I'm going on a sex spree, a food spree, a money spree, a fear spree, a gambling spree, a fear spree, a thinking spree, some sort of spree, because God forbid I should be present to the moment. Oh, that's not good. I can't stand the silence. I can't stand the stillness. I speak when I cease to be at peace with my thoughts. I have to do stuff when I cease to be at peace with my thoughts. Got to do something. Got to say something. Keep busy. Something. Drama. Got any drama? Let's get into your drama. No drama? Let's invent drama. Let's do something. You ever sit on the couch, or park bench? I've had enough park benches. No more park benches. Sitting on your home, maybe out on a terrace. Wow, this is great. I'm sober this long, 30 days, 90 days, 6 months, 20 years. Relationship is good, the health is good, the kids are good, the wife is good, her health is good, the money's good, the house is good, the car is good, my job is good, my boss is good, everything's good, the neighborhood's good, the sun is out, it's 80 degrees, life is great, everything's good. And then the mind goes, yeah, but remember? Not good, I hate my wife, I don't want these kids, I hate my job, I gotta get out of here, I'm moving. And then it starts. And you know what's really frightening? I like that better than everything's good. I can just be here. For how long? Need something. Let me call somebody. Without getting too far off topic, I actually feel bad for the new youngins coming in. In 1988, I don't remember having cell phones. And when we first got cell phones, there was no internet. You call out and get a call in. That was it. And we got it basically out of necessity. But I got youngins coming in bombarded with the world. Getting their facts for life on Facebook. And they're coming in with phones, and this is just the way it is, I don't blame them, and glued to a phone, joining a meeting, and just overwhelmed with bad information constantly. So the way when I came in, they had to flush out all the poison, these poor folks got like double the amount of stuff that's walking around while they're sober, and it's not nonstop, which makes our work, the elders, that much harder. There's being rehabilitated, and for some of us, habilitated. I'm not discussing anything, so there's no 5th step. There's no confession. I'm not pulling Paul over and say, Paul, I need to talk to you. I got some images. I can run this by you. There's no 911 calls. I'll handle it. I'm not calling anyone. And that wall gets higher and thicker. Where I insulate myself from members in Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, if you ask me, I'll give you little droplets of how I'm doing, but it's all good. Everything's okay. I'm not going to share too much. Not going to let you in, and don't ask to get in. And nothing's getting out, and I'm not going to pry into your business either. I just do a lot of gossiping about a lot of people. There's no 3rd step because I'm God. Insane thoughts are coming back. I'm acting out. I'm emerging remorseful from one of those sprees with the firm resolution, I got to stop the sex spree because if he or she finds out I'm getting divorced. I got to stop gambling because if he or she finds out I'm going to get divorced. And it goes on and on and on. I got a secret life. I got like 2 lives in AA. I got the AA, I'm great life, and then life out there. And that's the one I really serve. And then I'm drunk. And the same way I go forwards through the steps, I can go backwards through the steps. Now here's how we know the egos reemerge. If I think I'm immune, for that happening to me, I'm in deep trouble. The reality is, with 30 years sober, having gone through this book many, many times and sponsoring a bunch of men, that can happen to me starting now. Get it? That I don't transcend my alcohols. We can transcend this life. We can almost rise above it, where we wear the world like a loose garment. And life is problematic, it's unfair, it's a world of impermanence, but we can navigate through that like light, rather than having the world on our back. But just getting information for a drunk like me that's not gonna happen. I will be someone who goes forwards through the work, becomes an AA lawyer, and then goes backwards through the work, and then becomes a newcomer, if I'm lucky. What the work ought to do, and you see if you identify with this, is the further I get away from step work, meaning step 1, meaning 1 into 2, into 3, 4, and 5, 6 and 7, etc. Am I getting further away from, watch this, step 1, or am I getting deeper into step 1 and the need for power? Because I don't have any. Has this work unshackled the handcuffs around my wrist that I have put on and threw the key away? Because the prayer life brings death to every identity that does not come from God. Here's one of them. I go through the steps. I'm a big book guy. I'm Teflon now. And I'm going to walk around and say, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you got the wrong sponsor. Follow me over a cliff. I know what I'm doing. That's my new identity. I'm Pete, the big book guy. Dangerous. I'm Pete, the spiritual guy, whatever it is. You know, you marry the big book girl. I mean, it's dangerous because we actually assume that identity. And prayer should bring death to every identity that does not come from God. What I settle for is being a spoke in a big wheel. I watched this. Folks getting into the book, studying the book, knowing about Bill, knowing about Bob, knowing the history, knowing all of it, but don't take the necessary action, yes? With all that information being restless, ill, and discontented in the meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, wondering when's it going to work. You know how many folks do we know who sponsor people, know the information in the book, but do not have a sponsor, never actually took the steps? It's pretty frightening. So my job is to go through the work. Now, here's the hook. How desperate am I? How willing to go to any lengths am I? So what I do is I trickle back to step 1. Has step 1 been the catalyst to get me off the ground and just chop wood and carry water and follow directions? Knowing the book and having an experience is two different things. Knowing about spiritual living, watching it happen, reading books about spiritual living is completely different than having my own spiritual walk. And the thing about being in the spiritual walk, the elders might be in the deep end of the pool, witnessing miracles, being attuned to all the miracles, having this hotline to God, just being in a deep, wonderful, enlightened spiritual place. And I have 10 days, I'm in the kiddie end of the pool. But we're both in the same water. And the elder knows that. And the elder knows there might come a day he might have to lean on that kid in the kiddie pool, because eventually we'll swim across. The thing about spiritual living, the common denominator is I'm an alcoholic, we walked in the room, and I need you just as much as you need me, yes? That only comes through taking action and taking a look at what's going on within me. Now, the ego doesn't want to see what's going on within me. You know, God's light is actually, the mind can't see. The mind goes blind in God's light, if you will. Doesn't even want to hear about it because it knows it might die. And that's where the problem lies, in the mind. That when I experience God, very often I thought the spiritual walk would be butterflies and rainbows. I'm almost out of time here. Butterflies and rainbows. And sometimes it is. But very often when we encounter God, it's not so much a feeling of victory, but one of complete defeat, the death of self, where we're on bended knee begging for mercy. Now to the ego in the mind, that sounds awful until you're in there and you realize it's actually the growth. It's actually the beginning of a new walk. And I'm out of time, so we'll come back and I'll continue later. Thank you.